Next, we have joining us virtually Kevin Ryan. Welcome, Kevin, and you've got 3 minutes. Please let us know what your address is as well.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to make comment. My name is Kevin Ryan, and I'm your neighbor in Superior. Today, like most board meetings and work sessions, you will be reviewing several items related to the airport. I ask that you review these topics today and in the future with an eye towards meeting the promises that have been made in the past. Promises made on grant assurances as a public use airport, promises made on land use documents approved through the public hearing process, promises made in property entitlement documents and other contracts, and promises made in your own airport minimum standards. Today, I want to speak specifically about the minimum standards. These set the standards and requirements that must be met by any entity who chooses to operate aeronautical activities at the airport. They are referenced frequently in grant applications first drafted in 2002. They've been revised a number of times over the last 20 years to include provisions ensuring a high quality of services, safety standards, and the orderly development of the airport property. Residents of Jefferson County, adjacent communities, the FAA, and airport tenants have all relied upon these promises. One of the key provisions of these minimum standards is a requirement to obtain a commercial activity permit. Any entity with plans for aeronautical activity must apply to the airport and county for review and approval. This application gives the airport authority the opportunity to ensure compliances with those promises made above. After an open records request, I learned that the airport and county have been ignoring these requirements. What's worse, I've been notified that these minimum standards have been considered to be antiquated and will soon be eliminated. The county will simply collect a business application and certificate of good standing. I will point out these are the same standards for a home-based business doing administrative work. The bar for aeronautical businesses at a GA airport must be higher. I can't fathom how the county is even considering removing these standards that will ensure entities conduct aeronautical activities are compatible with the airport's master plan and land use documents. This isn't just a matter of land use compliance, though. It's a matter of safety. Without these standards, entities like Bluebird Aviation, an unlicensed charter business, have been permitted to operate. They took a single mother and her 2 children as passengers on an unlawful charter on a plane that was not airworthy. This resulted in the tragic death of 4 people. My request today is you direct your staff to have a properly noticed meeting about these minimum standards. If they require revision, that should be done with a public process with the assistance of the Airport Advisory Board, including rigorous public engagement to consider stakeholder input approved through this Board of Commissioners. Thank you.
Sure will. So this is Ben Miller, Planning and Development Administrator for the airport. And I'll walk you through our presentation on Part 150. So I think you guys are aware of this, but I'll provide just some general background. This language is all directly from an FAA handout. So the primary goal of Part 150 is to reduce the number of people living in significantly noise impacted areas around the airport. In this Part 150, it's a very highly very organized process that's set out in FAA regulations. It involves a community outreach component. It specifies how the FAA is involved. The airport can receive federal financial support. And the part I like most is that one of the outcomes is a noise compatibility plan along with modeled noise contours. But that noise compatibility plan is where the airport and other stakeholders can recommend a series of ideas that the FAA can weigh in on that will impact noise and hopefully mitigate noise around the airport. It is important to manage expectations about Part 150 study and what it can and cannot do. And it's also an approximately 2-year process. So we're in it for the long haul when we start. So those recommendations in the noise compatibility plan can fall into generally 4 categories: flight procedures, local zoning changes, land acquisition, or sound insulation for residences. And this is important too, because it's been a discussion lately, is I just wanted to note the FAA states a community noise roundtable is not required to complete a Part 150 study. However, it can lead to more effective community participation in the process. So this is just an example of the noise contours that come out of a Part 150 study. And so the consultant that an airport hires, they're familiar with how to do this. And there's a very organized process for modeling noise contours. And so this is for Centennial Airport, and they're currently revising their noise contours. This is their older map. But you know, the number that's kind of most important to the FAA is at 65 DNL or day-night level, and that's where they're looking for incompatible land uses within that noise contour. So where do we stand in this process? We know the Part 150 has been a request of many community members, 2 U.S. representatives, and the RMMA Community Noise Roundtable members. One of the holdups is the airport always had heard that it was about a $2 million cost. But fortunately, last year, we were notified by the FAA that we'd be eligible for a grant that would cover approximately 90% of the project cost. So we're recommending we go ahead with the study now. And we have already issued a statement of qualifications to select a qualified consultant that will help develop the contract and submit for an FAA grant if you all approve. And so that's what we're here today, is to ask for your approval to proceed with the study and apply for the federal grant, which should cover approximately 90% of that $2 million cost. And I think that's all I had. Happy to answer any questions.
Great, Ben, thanks so much for your presentation this morning. We really appreciate it. Could you tell us a little bit more about the timeline? You mentioned that the application for the grant, I think, or work with the consulting firm, the screen. Yes, thank you so much. Work with the selected firm to submit for a federal grant happens this summer. Can you talk to us more about when you might expect that to be approved, if we are granted approval, and then the amount of time that it takes to conduct the actual study and when we might see results?
Sure. So I actually just had a conversation with the FAA yesterday, and they say that the grant application deadline is sometime in June. I haven't got an exact date yet, but will shortly. And then we have to have negotiated fees agreed to by July in order to actually have that grant awarded. And assuming it's awarded in July, we can start work as soon as we issue a notice to proceed with the consultant, and hopefully they can be off and running maybe later this summer. And then what we've been told is it's a 2-year process. So, I'd expect if that's the case, 2 years later, we'll be back with final results, but there'll be public engagement throughout that process. And we'll work with that consultant and the FAA to determine where those checkpoints are and with whom. But I would expect that process to be, hitting early or in the fall and winter of 2024, and then throughout 2025 before we have a final study in 2026.
Great. And Ben, as you know, there's lots of community interest. We're very interested too in the results of this study, should the grant be awarded to Jefferson County. Can you talk a little bit more about the public engagement component, what that might look like? And then I'll turn to Commissioners Kraft, Tharp, and Kerr for additional questions and comments.
Okay, unfortunately, I don't have the best answer on that yet, because I think we need to work with the consultant and the FAA to define the particular scope they'd recommend for our particular airport. My expectations would be that there are regular check-ins with the Jeffco Airport Advisory Board, and also with the Community Noise Roundtable, if that is still in existence. And then I believe there's a series of public meetings or hearings that are formally required as part of the process. But we can update you more probably within the next month or two if you'd like kind of a more detailed public engagement scope.
Great, thank you. That'd be terrific. Commissioners, do you have any comments or any questions for Ben this morning?
Yes. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Ben, very much for your information. There's a lot of interest in the Part 150. There's also a lot of confusion. Can you very briefly describe what noise modeling is versus noise monitoring?
Sure. So I believe there's a computer model, or for lack of a better word, that the FAA recognizes is the right tool to use for any consultant who's going through this. And what they do is they take all of the available data at the airport in terms of what aircraft are using the airport, how often, that sort of thing. And it actually models out noise contours based on the layout of the runway, how often runways are used, and in what direction, and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's, to be clear, it's certainly it's a computer model that is projecting noise contours. And then actually one of the recommendations that can happen as part of a Part 150 study is to actually install noise monitoring equipment. That's what happened at Centennial when they did their Part 150 back in the late 1990s. But the Part 150 itself is purely a noise model.
Thank you.
Commissioner Kerr.
Yes, thank you. Ben, thank you for your presentation. I'm wondering, the other subject that is brought up quite a bit at the airport is on leaded aviation fuel. And I understand, the Part 150 is a noise compatibility study. Is there any piece within this that would also look at the use of the leaded avgas, or at least you mentioned the modeling on the types of planes that would be landing. Is there any way we can get some information or some data about the use of leaded avgas through this Part 150?
Not that I'm aware of. I know the FAA views their Eagle initiative as the way they are addressing the phase out of leaded avgas. Certainly, I guess if we had a fleet mix, there will be a fleet mix that is used. It's the fleet mix of like, oh, there's this many Cessnas and this many Pipers, this many Cessnas, Citation jets. If we use that fleet mix, I guess you could kind of infer how many aircraft are burning unleaded or leaded avgas versus jet fuel, and we probably don't have that data at the moment. But yeah, I don't think the Part 150 specifically addresses leaded or unleaded avgas.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. Great. Thank you so much, Ben. We appreciate your time this morning, and thanks for the great presentation. May I have a motion to approve item 7.1?
I move for the approval of regular agenda item 7.1.
Second.
Ms. La Liberté, would you please call the vote?
Commissioner Kraftharp,
Yes.
Commissioner Kerr,
Aye.
Commissioner Dahlkemper.
Yes, and that motion passes.